Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Welcome, welcome. We are still admitting a few people to the meeting, so we're just gonna wait 1 minute, and then we will get started. Just a note that everybody who is not a speaker or a TCC staff member should be muted for this meeting. So if you'd like to ask any questions or make any comments, you should be able to do so in the meeting chat. And our staff will be monitoring it and responding to you or making sure we get your questions asked as we go through the event today. You should be able to see my slides pulled up on your screen. If you don't, let us know in the chat. All right, great. We are going to go ahead and get started. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today for Transportation Choices Coalition's 2026 Legislative Agenda Preview. Super happy to have you here today. My name's Katie Ricciuto. I am the Policy Director for TCC. If you don't know who Transportation Choices Coalition is, we're going to talk through it in just a minute. Our Executive Director, Kirk, is going to kick us off in just a minute. But I wanted to run through quickly before we turn it over to him our agenda for today. So I'm going to welcome you and just do a little bit of housekeeping before we get started with the main things we want to talk about today. And then Kirk, our executive director, is going to talk a little bit more about Transportation Choices Coalition. And then we are going to hear from our guest speaker, Senator Marco Leis, on his priorities for the upcoming 2026 session. Our lobbyist, Bryce, is going to give a little bit more of a detailed overview of what to expect this session. And then we are going to go into a preview of TCC's legislative agenda and have a question and answer session following that. And finally, we'll end with how to get involved more with our work during legislative session. Just a reminder, so you are all muted. If you'd like to make a comment or ask questions, please do so in the chat. Our staff are going to be monitoring that. This meeting is being recorded, and the recording and any documents that we talk about, including a two-pager of our legislative agenda and follow-up from this meeting, are going to be shared in an email to you all after the meeting and on our website as well. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our Executive Director, Kirk Hovenkotter. Thanks, Kirk.
Thanks, Katie, and thank you all so much for being here. I'm Kirk Hovenkotter, the Executive Director of Transportation Choices Coalition. I'm the one in the bow tie in this very dapper photo from our gala, Tuxes and Trains. For 33 years, Transportation Choices Coalition has been Washington State's advocate for safe, sustainable, and equitable transportation. We are a coalition of business, labor, transit agencies, transit riders, and elected leaders, all beating the drum for more investments in transit and safe walks to transit. We are most known for running major ballot measure campaigns. We ran the campaigns in 2016, 2008, and 1996 to expand light rail across the region. In 2024, we ran the Seattle Transportation Levy, which was the largest investment in streets, trails, and transit in the city's history. And we've also run smaller campaigns across the state, like the Yes on Ellensburg Transit campaign that was successful just last year. We also organize transit riders across the state. But we spend a lot of our time in the state legislature advocating for policy and funding for fast, frequent, and reliable transit and safe walks to transit. And we do that because we know the legislature is where we can do big things. Some of the biggest wins we've had as an organization were done in the legislature. Some of those wins were Youth Ride Free, where the 1.7 million residents of Washington State under the age of 19 can now ride transit for free because of policy passed in the state legislature. The state legislature is also where we won transit support grants. This is the first time the state legislature has funded transit operations for large agencies in Washington State. And the legislature is also where last year we won $100 million for our mega project for safety initiative, making Washington State's Main Street highways safer, which we'll talk more about later on. But none of those wins that I just mentioned would have been possible without the guests that we have here with us today. State Senator Marco Leis has been in the legislature since 2008 and has been a champion for transit and making our streets, trails, and transit uh, places we can be proud of. We're thrilled to have Senator Marco Elias here to share his thoughts on transportation in the legislature. Senator Marco Elias chairs the Senate Transportation Committee and has been a key partner for us on so many issues during his time in that role. So I'm excited to pass it off to Senator Marco Elias to share his perspectives on the session and what his priorities are on transportation. Senator, I'll pass it off to you.
Yes, thank you, Kirk. Kirk, you buried the lead. I'm also a past TCC board member. Um,
Sorry.
that is part of why we've had such great transportation policy in this state for the last couple of years, because I was trained well by generations of TCC leaders before me. I will say it's great to be with you. We've got, of course, a tough situation in our country. When we think about the news and we read what's going on, we have a tough situation in our state's operating budget. Transportation is one of those few places where we really are making measurable progress to move forward, and it's a delight to be able to work with this coalition to keep making progress. I'll say, like, my overarching priorities in transportation have been the same across several years, but they are to preserve what we've got. That means our assets, but it also means our clean air and our clean water and our way of life here. We've also got to finish what we've started. We've got a lot of impressive things underway, new bridges across the Columbia River that we're going to build, new investments in transit and in safety. We've got to finish the promises that we've made. And ultimately, the transportation system exists for one purpose. That is to get people where they want to go safely and efficiently. And on that measure, we're not doing as well as we could. We're at not quite record levels of fatalities, but just below record levels of fatalities. And we also know from the greenhouse gas emissions that our system generates, it's the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in our state. So we're not getting people where they need to go safely, and we're not doing it as efficiently as we can. That's where we've got to focus our efforts in the years ahead. Safety will continue to be an overriding priority. We got the first 100 million. We got at least 900 million more to go before we get that billion-dollar mega project for safety. Now, this supplemental budget will probably be not the year to make that full commitment. We've got to keep our momentum going towards that prize. We also need to acknowledge that the work we've done together to get the use of more automated tools and to make investments in our safe systems approach have seen reductions in fatalities. Early data shows 10% reductions from 23 to 24 and another 10% from 24 to 25. So we're headed back in the right direction. We have to sustain this momentum and keep it going. That means we've got to look at things like impaired driving and our state's blood alcohol content limit, which is too high when you compare it to our global colleagues. 2/3 of the world, 75% of the world has a 0.05 or lower. We need to join them and make our system safer. We also have to really, as I said, invest in preserving the assets we've got. I'm really proud of Governor Ferguson in his budget making preservation a core priority, and not just preservation of the highway, but with our complete streets mandate, that means all those preservation projects that we undertake are going to build the complete streets that we need across our system. That's how we're going to incrementally get to where we need to get for our system. We also need to acknowledge that our state ferries is a part of our state highway system. So preservation of our highways means new vessels, new terminals, the infrastructure we need, just like our new multimodal terminal in Mukilteo, to enable all people, all users, all modes to enjoy our ferry system. And by the way, Kirk, that's also free for youth 19 and under as they ride on our ferries, as well as the Amtrak Cascade. So this is going to be the core priority. This past session, we had strong bipartisan action in the Senate to pass new revenue to invest in our transportation system. We're going to continue that bipartisan approach. We're going to continue to make progress on the projects we've started, to focus on preserving what we've got, and stay laser focused on making sure that at the end of the day, Washingtonians can get where they want to go safely, efficiently, and in a way that preserves the beautiful quality of life that we enjoy in our state. So that's a high-level summary. I'm excited to work with Kirk, the board, your advocate Bryce in Olympia, to day by day make progress on this. I also saw the first cut of our early action priorities, and our safe system bill, which will ensure that our complete streets mandate has maximum effect, is one of those early priorities that we look forward to moving in this 2026 session. So safety, preservation, finishing what we started. We're going to stay on track.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Senator. Thanks for joining. Look forward to continuing to work with you on all the policies and the budget as we head into session, which gets started on Monday. So we will see you down there on Sunday. Enjoy. Well, I'd say enjoy the rest of your weekend, but I have a feeling I know what you're doing, just like the rest
I
of
got
us.
to pack everything up so I can be
I
down
know.
there.
I'm moving down on Monday or Sunday, so I'm looking forward to it. Well, thanks a lot, and you have a
Thank you
good
so
one.
much. Take care,
Thanks,
everybody.
Senator.
Awesome. Well, I think Senator Leas did a great job at setting up what the baseline priorities and kind of the direction that the legislature is going to go in. I wanted to highlight just a few more things really quickly for everybody in terms of what we expect out of 2026. You heard him mention a few key components, especially on the transportation budget, but I'm going to kind of give a wider lens here today, which is just real quickly going over some basics, which is it's a quick 60-day session. This is a supplemental budget year, which means that they're not going to be making most likely significant changes to any of the budgets. I say significant being in the context that they set the funding in odd years and then they make tweaks depending on forecast revenue expectations and revenue expenditures for certain things. So thinking about it in that context, Senator Leas also mentioned that functionally the transportation budget is in a better spot this year than it has been in previous years. With that said, the operating budget is going to see a number of struggles. It is there is a deficit of just over $2 billion currently, based off of projections in the operating budget that the chambers are going to have to manage and deal with through a set of cuts, perhaps taking from the rainy day fund or other things. So I would say that a bulk of the conversation is going to be around how do they deal with the impacts of federal changes to programs, supports, and other things on the operating budget. We know that in the transportation budget, as he mentioned, things are pretty steady right now. We are trying to finalize those projects and finish what we started, as the senator mentioned. So that's going to be the top of the list, along with increasing that maintenance and preservation budget and continuing on with that. With the context of that, I would say a lot of what the goals are this year is policy that doesn't impact budgets at all. So policy bills in the transportation space that don't cost a lot of money or don't cost any money are more likely to move forward. And that's similar to what's going to happen in the operating budget as well at the end of the year. From a TCC perspective, a lot of our work, again, is going to be maintaining the safety mega project money that we've gained over the last few years, ensuring that things like the CCA funding for transit support grants and youth ride free continue without a drop off. Find ways to expand programs or possibilities in the future for funding. Really, that's going to be the focus of a very, very quick session that's going to be over before you think about it. I think the final pieces I just want to say is that, expect budgets to come late February, early March, because that's when the revenue forecast comes out. So before then, a lot of it is going to be just setting up the baseline of what we expect. Again, I think that we can look at the transportation budget clear-eyed, that we've set the table, we kind of know where we're at. Things like ferries are going to be continued to be invested in, maintenance and preservation, highlighting the need to continue to invest in fish passage barrier and stuff like that is still going to take a lot of it. And the final piece that I think is going to really help manage some of the transportation budget at the end of the day is they have built up some bonding capacity that's going to kind of help ensure that we are not cutting programs in the transportation budget. I would say that both chambers have taken a very thoughtful approach over the last couple of years, especially last year with the additional revenue that was secured, to ensure that both we have reserves in the transportation budget to address increased costs that we're seeing across the board, in addition to ensuring that we have a long-term stable capital program uh, ready to go into the future as we can. So again, I think that a bulk of the conversation is going to be around key policy decisions that will impact future budgets this year. And then really a lot of the focus is going to be on the operating budget. So just trying to get through that over the next 60 days and we'll be good to go.
Awesome. Thank you, Bryce. Appreciate having you here. I think what we'll do is I'm going to share my screen again, and we're going to save questions for Bryce till the end because I think we're going to have plenty of time at the end for Q&A after Kirk and I run through the rest of the legislative agenda. So again, if you have questions for Bryce, please feel free to type them out in the chat, and we'll be monitoring that, and we'll find time at the end to ask those questions. So now we're going to go into reviewing TCC's 2026 legislative agenda. And we have a handful of things on the agenda that Kirk and I are going to talk you through. So we are going to start with our first legislative agenda item. And a lot of these things, Bryce and Senator Elias both alluded to as they were talking. So it was a great introduction to what we're going to be working on this year. Our first one is enacting a fix-it-first approach. As we've talked about, as Senator Elias just talked about and Bryce did, we would love to see a focus on prioritizing our gas tax revenue going to fully fund the maintenance of what we have rather than expanding highways. We really think there's a lot of bipartisan agreement that we need a stronger focus on maintenance and preservation. And from TCC's perspective, fix it first does not mean rebuilding roads exactly as they are today. Senator Elias also alluded to this. We want reliable streets. We want reliable streets for transit riders, for active transportation users. But we don't want to preserve dangerous roads. So really focusing on money going towards maintenance and preservation and making sure our complete streets mandates are implemented as roads are rebuilt. That will get us to our safety goals, to our climate goals, and to our equity goals across the state. And I'm going to turn it over to Kirk for our next agenda item.
Thanks, Katie. Our second of our 6 priorities is, as Senator Elias mentioned, advancing a statewide mega project for safety. Last year, we called for our state legislators to bring the same approach they bring to floating bridge projects or freight projects to our most dangerous and busy roadways. These are WashDOT's Main Street highways. These are roadways across the state like Aurora, Division Street in Spokane, Pacific Avenue in Tacoma, Wheaton Way in East Bremerton, or Highway 2 through Monroe. These are our most dangerous streets in our state. And they're also state-owned roadways that are across the state. These are also our busiest transit streets. We want to see the state bring the approach and investment that they bring to their other mega projects to these roadways. We were proud to win $100 million in the 27 to 29 biennium for these roadways. But we know that's just a down payment on what we need. We called for a $1.5 billion investment over 10 years. And as you heard from Senator Elias, that we're going to continue to ask for that money to make sure we get the investment that these roadways deserve. In this legislative session, we are going to direct WashDOT or get legislators to direct WashDOT on how to shape that funding. We want lawmakers to direct WashDOT to create clear, comprehensive plans for how to use the $100 million we won and the additional money that we're going to win for this mega project going forward. As Katie mentioned, we don't want to see Main Street highways rebuilt just as they are. That would be a failure. We want them to be built like this rendering of Division Street in Spokane. We want them to be safe places with more frequent crosswalks, safe sidewalks, safe places to bike, and transit lanes that make transit more reliable. And we're going to direct lawmakers to make WashDOT come up with a plan of how they're going to invest these dollars to make a difference that riders, people in our neighborhoods, and residents can actually see that a difference has been made in their community and make these streets places we can be proud of. I'll pass it off to Katie for our next legislative priority.
Our next priority for 2026 is funding and expanding the intercity bus program. So whether or not you're familiar with the Travel Washington intercity bus program, this provides really vital transit access to people across the state, especially people in rural areas and people who are trying to get between some of our smaller cities across Washington. Last year, we won $5 million in one-time investment that allowed Travel Washington program to expand their service and launch new routes. But in reality, they need about $10 million per biennium in ongoing funding to keep the program going. This is especially important because as the federal government changes its priorities and as private coaches and private companies pull out of routes across states like Washington, state funding for this really important service is going to need to continue. So, the Travel Washington program released a report in 2024 that talked about what they would do in terms of their priorities for both expanding service and both expanding lines and expanding frequency on some of their lines across the state. So this is the current Travel Washington network. If you see the yellow line that's on here, this is the wheat line. It's going to be new in 2026. And this was something that was able to be implemented, the wheat line between Spokane and Tri-Cities, specifically because of the funding that was allocated to this program last year. There's a number of other priorities in the 2024 Travel Washington report that would make a significant difference for transit riders, especially rural transit riders across our state. And we really want to see that implemented this year through an additional $10 million biennium funding.
Thanks, Katie. Our next,
Whoa, I do not know what's happening there. Kathleen, if you are doing something on the screen, I'm going to try to fix that, but go ahead, Kirk.
All right. Well, with that added color, our next priority is making sure that our regional transportation planning organizations, that their plans to invest in transportation infrastructure actually go to reducing greenhouse gas emissions and reducing vehicle miles traveled. We were proud to have led a bill that revamped the Growth Management Act that required cities and counties in Washington state to reduce vehicle miles traveled and reduce greenhouse gas emissions in their comprehensive plans. The next step that we want to take is to make sure that our state's regional transportation planning organizations, these are organizations like metropolitan planning organizations or MPOs, are also required to make sure their plans cut vehicle emissions and vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas emissions. We know that our goal is to make sure that we require the Washington State Department of Transportation to do this as well. We see that getting regional transportation planning organizations to do this is just the first step to getting WashDOT to do that and building off our success, getting cities and counties to be required to do that. This is a wonky policy, but we think it is going to have a big impact in helping us meet Washington state laws that require us to drastically cut emissions and vehicle miles traveled by 2050. Let's hop on to the next priority and see if that cleans up the screen.
Okay, I think I just figured it out. All right. Our next priority is designing a progressive road usage charge. So, many of you who are familiar with TCC's work have heard us talk about a road usage charge before, or you're engaged in this conversation on your own as well. Really, the gas tax as a way to fund roads, maintenance, preservation, and even transit across Washington is not a long-term solution. The gas tax right now is declining and or flat. And as more and more people drive electric cars, and if the outlook for revenue changes across the state of Washington and in many other states, we're really going to need to figure out a long-term solution for how we can fund our transportation budget in Washington. It's also a huge opportunity to figure out if there are ways to fund the transportation budget differently and fund different things in the future. So last year, a road usage charge advanced as both a bill and in the biennium budget. but nothing passed. And so we are going to continue working with legislators and stakeholders to explore what a progressive road usage charge would look like. And one of our main priorities for that is ensuring that any sort of road usage charge includes additional funding for transit and active transportation. If you're familiar with the way the transportation budget is structured right now, anything that is generated through the gas tax is protected by the 18th Amendment in the Constitution and can only go towards certain things, mainly roads. But in the future, it doesn't need to be that way. So what we're going to be working on is figuring out a way to see if there is, if we can have additional funding for transit go to whatever is generated through a road usage charge. We also believe that a road usage charge should be fair and equitable. And so there's a lot of really smart people that are going to be working on this, and we're really excited to work in coalition and in collaboration with people on this in this session, and more likely in a larger and broader and more comprehensive way in 2027 as legislators start to think about what a future transportation revenue package could look like. And I'll turn it over to Kirk for our next one.
All right. And our final major priority for this session is making sure that we build light rail faster for riders. This is how we're going to help Sound Transit build the damn trains. We know that Sound Transit is a rich agency. It has the money, but it depends on when it has the money. And we know that building Everett Link, Tacoma Link, West Seattle, Ballard Link, and a second downtown tunnel is a huge expenditure. Sound Transit needs the financial flexibility to be able to build all of these projects ASAP. And allowing Sound Transit to issue 75-year bonds is going to allow them to do that. So we are going to strongly support extending Sound Transit's bonding authority to 75 years, which will match peer agencies across the country and be able to give them the financial flexibility to deliver and start construction on these light rail extensions sooner. This is one we're excited about and we're going to be following closely. And I'll pass it back to Katie, who's going to be sharing more about other transportation policies that we're following closely in the legislature that will be supported.
Yeah, so those are our top level priorities. But as you all know, and as many of you are working on yourselves, there's a lot of other really amazing policy and funding work happening in the state legislature this year that we may not necessarily be leading, but we're hoping to be supportive of and work with legislators and stakeholders on. So this is just a list of some of those. One of them is restoring funding for regional mobility grants. The governor has actually indicated in his budget proposal that this is something that he is interested in doing, but we're going to be tracking this and making sure that these mobility grants, which provide really important funding to transit agencies for capital and operations, are restored. Another one is expanding the commute trip reduction law. Some of our transportation demand management organization friends are working really hard on making this law apply in a broader way, so that more people can benefit from the commute to trip reduction in with major employers and in populated areas. So having this law apply at different times and to different types of employees is a really important way of doing that. Another one, as Senator Leas alluded to, is implementing a safe systems approach bill, which will really allow the State Department of Transportation to plan and implement their projects at Complete Streets mandate in a more efficient and more comprehensive way. And then advancing road safety bills, such as lowering DUI limits. Again, Senator Leas alluded to this when he was talking. Streamlining permitting, as Kirk mentioned, around Sound Transit and other things, making sure that we can get transit and transit-oriented development built faster in the state of Washington. And then finally, defending Washington's Climate Commitment Act. This funding is really important funding that goes towards meeting Washington's climate goals, funding equity and environmental justice organizations and other organizations and community priorities that are really important to our state. And this funding is pretty continuously under attack. It's a really important source of funding that people want to use for other things in the transportation budget. So we're really committed to making sure that this funding goes towards what was promised to voters when they upheld the Climate Commitment Act just a couple of years ago. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and go to the Q&A portion of this. And then we are going to wrap up after we do Q&A with a few more ways that we want you all to get involved moving forward. So let's see. We have some questions in the chat from people. And it looks like our first question, Bryce, you answered in the chat. It was around bonding for the state gas tax. And I was wondering if you wanted to say anything, come off mute.
Yeah, I mean, those are rough numbers. So I put, what portion of the state gas tax is already bonded against to fund it. There isn't like a direct number. They kind of run through how they keep a AAA rating and all that fun stuff. But essentially, after a quick review, it's somewhere in the region of $600 to $700 million that they have in bond retirement or debt service every year that they fund. So 1.2 to 1.5 billion maybe, and it sits around 8 to 10% of the budget. I would say, depending on the numbers. So it is still a big deal, and I'm not trying to say that that's a small number. It's a significant number, especially when you think about it. But with the 6-cent gas tax that they increased this year and no bonding associated with that, there is some authority left over. But that's kind of generally where the numbers sit, give or take a little bit.
Thanks, Bryce. We received a question from Andrew Glass Hastings. He wants to talk about robo-taxis. It sounds like Waymo is planning to introduce a bill this session, very similar to bills from past sessions, to create a policy path for deployment of their vehicles in Washington. Do you want to talk a little bit more about what the chances are of this bill moving in session and anything else you know?
Yeah, so I think on robo taxis or autonomous vehicles, I think from a TCC perspective, we're still waiting to see any language and everything. We've been asking for a number of years to have a conversation on what a state level guidelines or requirements would be, and unfortunately we haven't had those conversations from the AV partners, so we're still waiting for those to happen. But I think it's going to be an ongoing conversation. There are safety concerns obviously still hanging out there that probably need to be addressed. But again, I haven't seen it. We haven't had large conversations with folks, but I do understand that they plan on introducing it. So with everything in a 60-day session, it's probably going to be kind of difficult to introduce a new bill and run it with one that hasn't necessarily been worked for a couple of years. But I know that, as a participant, we want to have that conversation and see if there is a path forward, but unsure at this point just because we haven't seen anything.
Thanks, Bryce. Kirk, if you want to jump in at all on any of these answers too, let me know.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, our next question from Nicholas. As Washington moves towards a road usage charge, what equity guardrails need to be in place before implementation, especially for low income and rural drivers? Bryce or Kirk, do you have any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think that from our perspective, I think there's been a couple of key things that we have been trying to think about, which is, from a privacy perspective, there's a few different ways on how to collect data and information on how many miles you drove. There are, either you're tracked on GPS or you can report yours. So making sure whatever data and information's privacy, that needs to be a top priority. A lot of the conversations that we've had is how often and when do you pay a road usage charge? One of the benefits of a gas tax is every time you fill up, which could be anywhere from every few days to every month or two, depending on how much you drive. For one of my cars, we only fill it up every 2 or 3 months, so I only see it then. But that's when you pay the gas tax, right? So you're only paying it on an incremental basis when you're using it. So how do you set up a program that allows you to pay into the system is easily accessible and understood. And, you might not need to have a full computer to do. There are people who have vehicles that might not have smartphones, so they can't go and create an account and log in and do that stuff. So those are some of the accessibility thoughts that we have on it. We're also talking through how do we ensure that we look at it from a low income perspective. TCC for a number of years has worked on implementing and identifying how we could implement a low income toll program. And there's some work still continuing on that. And we're trying to figure out, can we layer that with a road usage charge? So people who, might be working multiple jobs, have to drive far because they're priced out of cities, or other reasons, can identify how we charge folks for that. I will say that, on the broader prospect of everything, we're also thinking about safety in a form of a road usage charge. How do bigger, heavier vehicles take into account versus smaller, more efficient ones? Obviously, the gas tax has efficiency built in, so the more efficient your vehicle is, the less you pay. Thinking about how do we function within that thought process. So there's a lot out there that we've been trying to address. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's complicated and difficult to implement, because we're trying to move past a very straightforward flat tax that doesn't really get to the end goals that I think we have in the transportation system. And then again, what Katie already mentioned, which is ensuring that a portion of this revenue can continue to go towards things such as, or can now go towards things such as, safety, or for transit and bike ped infrastructure that isn't directly connected to how our highway is, quote unquote, always defined within that context. So those are some of the things we're working on in the context of this. So there's a lot more left out there.
Yeah, and I'll add on to Bryce's comment. I mean, one of the things we really care about is what the money is going to. And we're Transportation Choices Coalition, and we want the investments from the road usage charge to go to making transit fast, frequent, and reliable, and something that people can count on. And we want that funding to also go to safe trails, safe sidewalks, safe bike lanes across the state. And today, the gas tax that you're paying typically doesn't go to that. The 18th Amendment protection keeps it to highway purposes. And so we know that we're going to make a more fair Washington by making sure the road usage charge, the funding source that we're going to rely on for the next 100 years, actually does invest in robust, frequent transit.
Awesome. Thank you both. Let's see. Let's go to this question next. Is there a risk that CCA funds will be redirected to help those impacted by the recent floods? If so, can we do anything to protect or reinforce? I think maybe it meant, Scott meant reinforce transit funding this session, acknowledging that many people were or are impacted and there are always trade-offs.
Yeah, so just to kind of a rundown, the CCA is the Climate Commitment Act money that goes to all three budgets. There's three. There's the transportation, operating, and capital budget. I'm only saying that because right now the first cut of dollars that are brought in goes to transportation, and right now those transportation dollars are accounted for, and those go to transit support grants, EV funding, other types of electrification of our transportation system that are very important, addressing air quality. So like the transportation budget kind of has it has a hard cap right now unless there's additional revenue provided to it. And that money is accounted for kind of in perpetuity because we've kind of set out those programs. Now, secondarily, there's the money that goes to the operating budget and capital budget. And I am unsure how they identify to use those funds next year. There is obviously, I don't like to use this like sentence, but it's one that I think both chairs of the operating budget has kind of used, which is like, with a $2 billion+ budget, some major issues coming through, such as the flooding and other things, everything's on the table to address to ensure that we're not leaving people behind. So I think in the transportation budget, I don't want to say that we're not going to have to do pushback on how they might want to use those funds. That's not the case. I think everybody's always going to want access to that money, but I think that we're pretty strong in that, and with everybody's voice, kind of to Katie's point, in one of our things, which is just defending the CCA. As a strong voice, we can ensure that the transit funding isn't cut or eliminated or changed. And again, we had Senator Elias, who's been a staunch supporter and a leader on identifying those funds and using them for transit support grants. Again, I think we still need to make sure that the legislature understands that those are accounted for and used and everything like that. But there is kind of an unknown on the other half of it.
Okay, our next question from Brock. There has been discussion about reallocating the new 0.1% sales tax for transportation funding back to the general operating fund to address the budget gap there. Does that idea have legs?
Brock, you're hurting me today. No, I'm just kidding. That there is a final transfer. I want to go back and have a sec and say, over the last couple of years, there's been a transfer from the transportation budget to the operating budget. And the idea was that, the agreement at the time was that would get paid back. And then because of the amount of capital projects that pay sales tax, the increase in sales tax for vehicles and other things, that some of that money would then make itself back into the transportation budget. I would suspect that we're not going to touch that until 2027, when the transfer from the general fund to the operating happens. I think it's a great question in the context that funding that you've identified is flexible money that can be used for things like transit, bike and pedestrian infrastructure in a way oftentimes that gas tax money couldn't. So it's a very real threat when you look at Medicare and Medicaid cuts coming through in 2027. I think most of us see the drastic impacts of the 27 budget, or the 27 budget, having a bigger impact on the state of Washington than this supplemental. So I know that it's going to be a very real conversation in 2027. It will come up this year, but since there is still one more transfer from the transpo to the operating, it probably won't come up until next year.
Hey.
But yes, people have mentioned it.
Great, thank you. A question on the road usage charge. Has there been discussion about also setting aside some of the road usage charge revenue to fund municipalities or TMAs to work to educate people about new robust frequent transit service programs and infrastructure?
I think that the conversation on road usage charge and how the expenditure working are still pretty in its, I hate to say, infancy. I think the big things have been I don't like the word replace, but how do you move from a gas tax to a road usage charge to continue to pay off the bonds we've already committed and all that stuff? There's other conversation that is parallel and a part of that, which is, what function how much currently municipalities get a cut of the gas tax? It's pretty tiny, it's pretty small, but there is an amount of gas tax that go directly to municipalities to be used for their roadways. And there's kind of guidelines on how they can use it and spend it. They're probably, depending on who you talk to, really strict or pretty, loose, depending on how you want to read the RCW. But I don't know how deep into conversations we've gotten into all of that level of detail, but I think it's one that, again, having the most flexibility for road usage charge on how to expend those funds to ensure everybody has access, everybody knows how to use the roadway, everybody knows the options available to them in the roadway or in the transportation system is key. So I think that's a good thing to continue to have a conversation about.
Thanks, Bryce. I think we probably have time for 2 more questions, so I'll just start. It's a little bit tangential, but I know there's going to be a lot of conversation this year around what the governor has talked about in regards to a millionaire's tax or some sort of income tax. So do you want to just give your like high level perspective on what that might look like this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think we have seen over the last few years a goal of the legislature to kind of rewrite sections of the tax code in Washington to shift away from a sales tax, which is extremely regressive, impacts lower income individuals more, to one that kind of starts to shift and change the way we look at it. So I think a big conversation that's going to happen this year, in addition to just solving a budget problem, is what does a millionaire's tax look like? What are the long-term goals and prospects of that? I will say that I'm not heavily involved in that conversation. We have partners that have been leading and having those conversations. So I don't. I also just want to say that like I would suspect that this is a thing that we're going to be talking about for a while and something that people should be engaged in if that's something that they care about. But I do think that we're going to continue to see a conversation on how Washington's tax structure stacks up to other states as it relates to low income individuals and high earners, and what are the outcomes that we're seeking within our tax outcomes. So, I think it's going to be a big conversation. I suspect it's going to be one of the things that's out there, considering the governor has come out in support, and there's been conversations at the legislative level. So I would suspect to see something. But yeah, I think that's where they're at, and it'll be very interesting to see the conversation that ensues in 2026 and see how much spills over to 27.
Okay, great. Last question I think we have time for is we had a question about presumed liability in the chat. So Bryce, just because I'm not sure everybody really understands what that is, can you give like a little bit of a high level explanation and what the likelihood of it passing, what you think the likelihood of something happening this session around it would be?
Yeah, so presumed liability is right now. I'm gonna give a very high level because there's a bunch of nuances out there because that's what law does. But presumed liability is who's at fault during a car crash or a vehicle crash with pedestrians or bicyclists. And insurance companies have a certain way to do it where you could be partially responsible for a crash because you did something. You can be something else. We have things like jaywalking laws, but still, at the end of the day, pedestrians are supposed to be protected in Washington under certain circumstances. So, presumed liability is just who's at fault during a crash. There is a bill that was put in the chat. Appreciate that. That would kind of say vulnerable road users are protected, and the vehicles are kind of responsible in those situations if a crash occurs instead of kind of trying to. So the presumption is that the vehicle is at fault, not the vulnerable road user. It's been around for a couple years. I would say that even I mentioned jaywalking. There was a push by TCC to eliminate that as a single offense. This is another version of it that continues to work its way. So we're excited that it's out there. I understand that there's amendments being prepared and conversations ongoing on, where it can apply. So I think overall it has, after 1 year being in there, this being the second, I think it has a better opportunity to pass this year. And again, our friends over at Washington Bikes and others have been working really hard on it with others to see a path forward. So, with our conversations with them, I think it's looking a lot better than it has previously. Excuse me.
All right. Thank you, Bryce. Appreciate you answering all of these really great questions. And thank you, everybody, for your questions. I think we got most of them answered. I also just wanted to shout out that Barb Chamberlain from Washshot is in the chat sharing a couple of really good resources on if you have a request for a crosswalk, and then also the 2024 Travel Washington report that we were talking about earlier in regards to intercity bus. So we will share some of these links out as well, but thank you, Barb. And then Veronica shared some information as well on more information on bonding if people have questions on that. So I think that we're going to wrap up our question and answers right now. If you have any more questions for us or Bryce, please feel free to reach out. We're going to share our contact information in at the end of this presentation, but I am going to turn it over to Kirk, who is going to take us through this next slide.
Thanks, Katie. And thanks everyone for your questions and engagement. We're excited for this legislative session and we're excited to dive in over the next 60 days. But we can't do this work without your support. We can't have an incredible full-time lobbyist who puts his body on the line in the halls of Olympia every single day to make sure that we're fighting for safe streets and frequent transit without funding, donations, and support. So please consider giving a donation to Transportation Choices Coalition to fund our advocacy across the state and fund this work in Olympia. Really, thank you, and we're gracious for your support. But along with funding this work, your time, your interest, and your advocacy is key to winning these improvements down in Olympia. So I'm going to pass it off to our advocacy manager, Holden Miner-Ringer, who's going to share more about how you can get involved this legislative session.
Howdy, y'all. Thank you guys so much for showing up today. This work doesn't happen without your guys' passion, your determination, and us working together to make big things happen. So in terms of just ways to be involved, ways to stay connected, the best way to do that is to sign up for our Dispatch from Olympia. That's going to be a weekly newsletter that's going to come out on Mondays, and it's going to give insight into what's happening in Olympia. Great source of information for what's happening down in the Capitol, and especially in regards to transportation. This will be the best way for folks to get action alerts and also find out ways to sign on to bills. So just really encourage you to sign on to the newsletter, and we'll put that link into the chat. And also just want to stress that, this is really how big things happen, is us working together. And also, if folks who are either an advocate or work in an organization that advocates, we are having a weekly meeting during session that's going to be happening on Fridays. So if anybody would like to learn more about those meetings, feel free to email me at holden@transportationchoices.org. So yeah, just feel free to contact me and also make sure to sign up for the newsletter. But just once again, want to thank you guys so much for showing up today. Looking forward to working with you guys all during session. And I want to pass it back over to Katie to finish it out today.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. We really appreciate you joining us. We're just about to wrap up. So just a reminder that we will be following up with you all with a recording from this event and with more information about signing up for our dispatch and staying in touch with us through session. And as Holden said, and as always, please feel free to reach out if you have any questions or would like to get involved. And we're so grateful that you are all here today. We could not do this work without you. Your engagement with us throughout session and your support of our work and your own advocacy is super critical to helping us advance transportation policy in Washington for everybody. So thank you very much for being here, and we'll see you throughout session. Have a great day.